Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the beating heart of the ancient world. Marble columns rise against a blue Mediterranean sky. Fountains spill crystal water into basins carved by master craftsmen. The air carries the sound of merchants bargaining, children laughing, soldiers marching in unison through the streets paved in stone. This is Rome. 2,000 years ago, it was the empire upon which the sun never set, the greatest power the world had ever seen. Its legions stretched across continents. From the misty forests of Britannia to the deserts of North Africa to the fertile crescent of the Middle East, Rome stood as the unshakable center of civilization. Everywhere its influence spread, it left behind roads, aqueducts, amphitheaters, and laws. It built not just cities, but a vision of order, of unity, of a world bound together beneath the eagle of the empire. Yet, as history tells us, nothing lasts forever. Rome began to crack beneath its own weight. Foreign invaders pressed against its borders. Economies faltered under the strain of overextension. Civil wars tore through its once unshakable foundation. And in time, the empire that had seemed eternal fell into ruin. What followed was chaos, a long and uncertain age where kingdoms rose and collapsed, where knowledge was lost, and centuries of human progress were delayed. Historians call it the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Poets called it the twilight of civilization. But what if things had been different? What if Rome had endured? What if one decisive battle had turned in its favor? One wise ruler had reformed its crumbling system? One bold idea had reshaped its destiny? Imagine a world where the Colosseum still roars with excitement, except the gladiators wield not swords, but weapons shaped by modern science. Imagine a language not split into dozens of dialects, but one universal tongue, Latin, spoken across the globe as naturally as English is today. Imagine an empire so enduring that the very concept of nations never arose, only provinces, united beneath the authority of Rome. The question is not just about history, but about possibility. What would our world look like today if Rome had never fallen? Would humanity be centuries ahead of where we are now, traveling to distant planets, harnessing powers beyond imagination? Or would an eternal Rome have become a prison of tradition, stifling change, locking us in a gilded cage? This journey will not be a quick one. Together, we will walk through the crossroads of history, where fact meets speculation, where the ruins of the past give rise to visions of what might have been. We will trace the empire's strength, its struggles, and the fragile moments where history could have bent in another direction. We will envision the world under an immortal empire, its politics, its culture, its religion, its daily life. This is not just a history lesson. It is a meditation on destiny, a chance to pause and reflect, not only on what was, but on what might have been. So settle in. Let the marble halls of Rome stretch out before your imagination. Feel the rhythm of sandals striking stone. Hear the voices of senators in debate, the cries of merchants in the forum, the chants of soldiers pledging loyalty to their emperor. And as the city glows in the fading light of an eternal sunset, let us begin our exploration into a question as timeless as Rome itself. What if the empire never fell? Chapter 1. The Immortal Empire. The year is 180 CE. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius, philosopher king, draws his final breath. In our history, his death marks the beginning of slow decline. His son, Commodus, would inherit power, ushering in years of corruption and instability. From this moment onward, Rome would stagger under the weight of poor leadership, civil wars, and internal decay. But what if the story had changed? What if, instead of decline, Marcus Aurelius' vision of duty, wisdom, and order lived on through his heirs? What if Rome, instead of stumbling, found its second wind? Imagine that Commodus never took the throne. Picture, instead, a chosen heir trained in philosophy and governance, a ruler more devoted to the people than to self-indulgence. Under such leadership, the empire might have entered a new, golden age, reforming its economy, strengthening its borders, and uniting its far-flung provinces under a renewed vision of Pax Romana, the eternal peace. The turning point. To change history, sometimes all it takes is a single decision, a single battle, or a single reform. Perhaps Rome invests not in endless wars, but in strengthening agriculture and trade. Perhaps the empire embraces its provinces as equal partners, granting broader citizenship, weaving loyalty through inclusion rather than force. Perhaps reforms to currency stabilize the economy, avoiding the spirals of inflation and scarcity that weakened the empire in our timeline. And with such reforms, Rome might not have fractured. The empire could have stood firm, flexible, adaptive, ready to endure. The living Rome in transition. Close your eyes and picture the transformation. The great marble forums of antiquity do not crumble. They expand. Basilicas, once courts of law, evolve into centers of administration buzzing with activity. Aqueducts, once carrying water, now begin to transport energy, redesigned with new technologies centuries ahead of schedule. The eagle standard of the legions continues to march, not into defeat, but into a new age. The empire finds a balance between tradition and innovation, blending the wisdom of its philosophers with the curiosity of its engineers. Rome does not fall. Rome lives. Daily life in an unbroken empire. Imagine walking through a Roman city not in the year 200, nor 400, but in the year 1200 or even 2000. The roads are no longer dusty stone, but shining with smooth surfaces, engineered from materials beyond our imagination. Markets bustle with goods from every corner of the world, silks from China, spices from India, grains from Africa, all flowing not through rival kingdoms, but through a unified network of provinces. Children in schools learn not only Greek philosophy and Roman law, but the early foundations of sciences we associate with much later centuries. Medicine, astronomy, engineering, all carried forward without interruption. And always, in every lesson, Latin remains the language of knowledge, its words shaping every thought, every discovery, every law. The eternal Colosseum. The Colosseum, too, would not fade into ruin. Instead, it evolves, adapting with the times. In this alternate world, imagine it fitted with advanced architecture, acoustics, and eventually technologies that dazzle the senses. The spectacles within change as the centuries pass, gladiators with steel, giving way to athletes in powered exosuits. Competitions blending martial skill with futuristic displays. Not just blood sport, but a continuous celebration of Roman grandeur. The crowd roars. The emperor presides. The games go on. The unifying power of Rome, As centuries unfold, the world does not splinter into countless nations. There are no France or Spain, no Germany or Britain as independent powers. There are only provinces of the empire, each with its own character, but bound together by a single identity, Raman. The empire becomes not merely a political system, but a global culture. The phrase civis Romanus sum, I am a Roman citizen, is spoken by billions. It is a birthright, not of a few, but of all humanity. A moment of reflection. Pause for a moment and let the image settle. Think of how different our own lives might be under such a system. Would you be a merchant trading across provinces without passports or borders? A scholar writing treatises in Latin, contributing to a chain of knowledge stretching back unbroken to Cicero? A farmer working fertile fields under the security of Roman protection, your crops feeding not just a nation, but an empire? Or perhaps you would be a soldier, still carrying the eagle standard across distant lands, ensuring that Rome's authority remained unchallenged. Shadows on the horizon. Yet even here, in this vision of unbroken glory, questions linger. Would an eternal Rome truly have embraced progress? Or would it have clung too tightly to its traditions, suppressing the very sparks of creativity that drive innovation? Would a single emperor, ruling for centuries through dynasties, bring stability or tyranny? Would the voice of dissent be heard or silenced? An empire that endures forever may promise unity. But unity can also mean conformity. The immortal empire. It is a dream of marble cities gleaming in the sun, of law and order stretching across centuries, of peace purchased by the power of Rome's legions. It is a vision of what might have been, had history chosen a different path. As we step forward into the next chapter, we will explore how such an empire unbroken and eternal might shape the very fabric of global politics, war, and innovation. The Pax Romana does not end. It continues, and the world is forever changed. Chapter 2. The Roman Pax continues. We have just left behind the vision of an empire that never fell, an immortal Rome stretching forward through the centuries, carrying its marble columns, its aqueducts, and its eagle banners into the modern age. In Chapter 1, we imagined a turning point, a moment when wiser leadership, timely reforms, or decisive victories altered the course of history. Rome, instead of breaking apart, adapted and endured. Its citizens lived not in fear of collapse, but in confidence of continuity. We walked the streets of this eternal city, seeing markets alive with global trade, schools preserving knowledge without interruption, and the Colosseum transformed into a beacon of evolving spectacle. But what happens when an empire that once dominated a single region now stretches across the entire globe? What happens to the politics of war and peace, to the birth of nations, to the very rhythm of history itself? This is where our meditation now turns. To a world where the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, did not end in the 5th century, but continued unbroken for 2,000 years. The politics of an eternal peace. In our history, the fall of Rome created a vacuum. Europe fractured into kingdoms and fiefdoms, constantly at war with one another. Out of these rivalries came the medieval world, the Renaissance, the rise of nation-states, and eventually the devastating conflicts of the modern-era world wars that scarred humanity. But in this alternate world, those wars might never have happened. There is no France fighting England, no Prussia clashing with Austria, no Cold War dividing East and West. Instead, there is only Rome administering its provinces through governors and senators, guided, at least in principle, by the emperor's will. The political map of the world is no patchwork of borders. It is one tapestry. From Britannia to India, from Africa to the Americas, the provinces are extensions of a single empire. It is worth pausing here. Imagine unfolding a map not of nations, but of provinces. Each one unique, each one contributing resources, soldiers, and culture, yet bound together under the banner of Rome. A single passport, a single identity, a single citizenship civis Romanus sum. The shape of innovation, but what of progress? What of the inventions, the discoveries, the leaps of imagination that have carried us into the modern world? Rome was brilliant at engineering. Roads that endure to this day. Aqueducts that carried water across miles. Architecture so precise that some structures still stand after 2,000 years. In an unbroken Rome, these traditions of practicality might have expanded without interruption. Bridges might not simply cross rivers, they might span seas. Aqueducts might not only deliver water, they might deliver energy. Yet, there is another side to consider. Innovation often thrives in competition. The rivalry of kingdoms, the pressures of survival, the exchange between cultures divided and reunited, all these fueled discovery in our timeline. Without that competition, would Rome's dominance have slowed the birth of ideas? Would inventors and philosophers have been silenced, their visions rejected by conservative senators clinging to tradition? Or would the empire's vast resources have accelerated progress, funding grand projects, encouraging experimentation, propelling humanity centuries ahead? Pause for a moment and imagine. Would we today be stepping into spaceships designed not by NASA or Roscosmos, but by the Roman legions of the stars? Or would we still be bound to the earth, our skies filled only with the echo of ancient hymns sung in Latin? A world without world wars. Now let us reflect on conflict. In our history, the 20th century was shaped by two catastrophic wars. The world was divided, millions perished, and technology leapt forward through desperation. But in a world where Rome never fell, those wars might never have come to pass. There would be no First World War sparked by assassinations and rival alliances. No Second World War born of fascism and revenge. Instead, humanity might have lived under a single military order for centuries, an army not fighting rival nations, but guarding borders against external threats, rebellions, or perhaps even turning its gaze beyond the earth. The Pax Romana would mean peace enforced by power. It is not the peace of equality, but of authority. The legions stand watch, not as defenders of freedom, but as guarantors of order. Is this peace preferable to the chaos of our world? Or does it come at too high a price? The absence of nations. Think for a moment of our world's diversity. The flags, the languages, the national identities that give shape to human culture. French art, Japanese technology, Indian philosophy, African rhythms, all flourishing in their own spheres, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in rivalry. In an eternal Rome, that mosaic would look very different. Instead of nations, we would see provinces. Instead of unique national cultures, we would see a Roman culture layered with provincial flavors. Latin would be the language of government and science. Roman law would dictate contracts, property, and justice. Festivals, holidays, and traditions would all carry echoes of Roman rituals, adapted through time but always bound to the empire's center. The diversity of nations might give way to the unity of provinces. Humanity would not rise as many voices but as one. We have already glimpsed how an eternal Rome could reshape politics, innovation, and peace. But to truly feel the depth of this alternate history, we must wander further. We must imagine Rome not as a static empire, but as a living force expanding, adapting, and reaching out into corners of the world it never touched in our timeline. Rome meets the Middle Kingdom. In our history, Rome and China knew of each other from afar. Silk traveled west along caravans, coins and glass traveled east, yet the two great empires never truly met face to face in force. But in a world where Rome never fell, such a meeting would have been inevitable. Picture the legions, disciplined and unyielding, marching eastward across the deserts of Central Asia. And picture, in turn, the armies of the Han, the Tang, or the Ming masters of cavalry, gunpowder, and bureaucracy. Would the encounter be one of war or of unity? Perhaps the Silk Road becomes a Roman highway, maintained by engineers, guarded by legionaries, stretching all the way to the gates of Xi'an. Perhaps Roman ships, improved by centuries of innovation, sail into Chinese harbors not as conquerors, but as emissaries. Two ancient titans joining hands to shape a truly global civilization. Imagine a fusion of Roman engineering and Chinese invention. Aqueducts carrying not only water, but steam. Roads built to carry caravans of silk and tea alongside Roman chariots. An empire stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific, bound not by conquest alone, but by shared ambition. The discovery of the New World. In our history, the Americas lay hidden from Europe until Columbus sailed in 1492. Long after Rome had crumbled. But in a world of unbroken Roman power, exploration might have come centuries earlier. Rome was not a seafaring empire in the same way as Spain or Portugal, but its engineers were resourceful. With an enduring drive to connect provinces to expand horizons, the empire might have turned its gaze westward across the Atlantic. Picture this. Roman triremes evolved into great ocean-going vessels, leaving the harbors of Hispania and Gaul, driven not by sails alone but by early steam engines crafted from centuries of continuous tinkering. They cross vast oceans, not in the 15th century, but perhaps as early as the 8th or 9th. And there they encounter civilizations, the Maya, the Aztec, the Inca. Would these peoples be met as partners woven into the fabric of empire? Or would they, like so many others, be conquered, their temples repurposed as forums, their languages folded beneath the weight of Latin? If Rome had claimed the Americas, the age of exploration would look very different. There would be no rival colonial powers, no scramble for land, no wars between Spain, Britain, France, and Portugal. There would only be the steady expansion of Rome, integrating new provinces into its unyielding embrace. Corn, potatoes, cacao, these might have enriched Roman diets centuries earlier. Gold and silver might have fueled even grander monuments, greater aqueducts, taller basilicas. The Columbian Exchange might have been a Roman exchange, centuries ahead of its time. The question of technology. It is worth pausing here. For many, Rome is remembered for its roads, its aqueducts, its concrete wonders of practicality. But Rome, in our history, did not leap to harness the power of steam, electricity, or gunpowder. Those revolutions came later in fractured Europe, driven by the spark of competition. So in this alternate world, what path might Rome have taken? Perhaps the empire, with resources drawn from every corner of the world, invests in invention not as luxury but necessity. With no collapse, no interruptions, knowledge grows steadily. Engineers study hydraulics, mechanics, even electricity, centuries ahead of schedule. By the Middle Ages in our timeline, Rome might already be experimenting with machines capable of industry, transport, and communication. Or perhaps the opposite. Perhaps the empire's love of tradition, its reverence for stability, slows progress. The aqueduct remains the aqueduct, perfected but never reimagined. The legion remains the legion, powerful but resistant to change. In such a world we might live today in cities of marble grandeur, timeless, beautiful, but centuries behind in technology. The question is tantalizing. Would Rome propel us forward or hold us back? The absence of colonization as we know it. Think for a moment of the colonial era in our history. Rival empires carving the globe, enslaving peoples, redrawing borders that still scar the modern world. Now replace that with Rome. No British Empire. No Spanish conquest. No French colonies. Instead, a steady Roman expansion territories claimed not as colonies, but as provinces. The people within granted citizenship, slowly woven into the fabric of the empire. It would not be a gentle process. Rome absorbed through conquest as often as through alliance. But the result would be different. Instead of nations competing, humanity would find itself under a single imperial framework. Would this mean fewer wars of conquest? Or would it simply mean that conquest was inevitable, unstoppable, all-consuming, under the Roman eagle? The fragile balance of peace? And yet, the idea of perpetual peace raises a deeper question. Peace under Rome is not peace born of equality. It is peace born of dominance. The legions enforce order. The emperor dictates law. The Senate debates, but the provinces obey. Would such a system allow humanity to flourish, or would it stifle the very diversity of thought that fuels progress? It is easy to imagine the grandeur of an unbroken Rome. Gleaming cities, global unity, endless order. But listen closely, and you might also hear the silence of voices never heard, of cultures absorbed, of revolutions that never came. The Roman Pax continues. The empire meets China, perhaps uniting East and West. It discovers the New World centuries before Columbus. It expands without rivals, weaving provinces into a single tapestry. The world avoids the wars of nations, but it also avoids the diversity of nations. Progress might come swiftly, or it might come slowly, trapped by tradition. And so, as we close this chapter, we are left with the paradox of an eternal peace. Is it the foundation of utopia or the prison of humanity's spirit? In our next meditation, we will step away from politics and technology and into something deeper. Culture, religion, philosophy. What becomes of art and faith in a world without the dark ages? What wisdom thrives and what mysteries fade? The Pax Romana does not end, and neither does our journey. Chapter 3. A world without the dark ages. History is full of turning points, and one of the greatest turning points of all came when Rome fell. With that collapse, the world entered what we often call the Dark Ages. It was an age not entirely devoid of light, but one where the flame of civilization burned far more dimly than before. Roads crumbled into weeds. Trade routes broke apart. Libraries were destroyed. The voices of philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists grew faint, preserved only in scraps, hidden in monasteries, or lost forever. But let us imagine something different. Let us imagine that Rome never fell, that the Dark Ages never arrived, that humanity's climb did not stumble, but continued upward, steady and unbroken. What kind of world would that be? The continuity of knowledge. In our history, the collapse of Rome created a silence. But in this alternate history, knowledge would never have gone quiet. Picture the Library of Alexandria, still standing tall on the coast of Egypt, its shelves packed with scrolls and codices from across the known world. In our timeline, fire consumed much of its treasure. But in this one, imagine its wisdom carefully guarded by the empire, expanded generation after generation. Roman engineers, instead of their knowledge scattering to ruins, pass it down directly to their apprentices, who in turn add new discoveries. Astronomy would not pause. Mathematics would not stagnate. Medicine would not fall into superstition. By the time our world reached the 7th century, Rome's world might already be experimenting with the steam engine, electricity, or even early forms of flight. The Renaissance, our rebirth of ancient learning, might not have come in the 1400s, but 800 years earlier. And so we must ask ourselves, if knowledge had never been interrupted, would we already be walking on distant planets? Would cures for disease, energy, and hunger have been discovered centuries ago? Or perhaps would progress have advanced too quickly, before humanity was ready to wield it wisely? Religion in an eternal empire. Religion shapes culture as much as politics. In our timeline, Christianity grew in the shadows of the Roman world, then became its official faith, and eventually defined medieval Europe. But in a Rome that never fell, the story might unfold differently. Imagine Christianity, Judaism, Mithraism, the old gods of Olympus, and countless local traditions, all surviving under the vast umbrella of imperial authority. Rome was often pragmatic in religion. As long as loyalty to the empire was affirmed, many gods could coexist. In this world, perhaps Christianity remains one faith among many, a spiritual voice but not a singular power. Perhaps it merges with the imperial cult, reshaping itself into a state religion stripped of its revolutionary edge. And what of Islam, which in our history rose in the 7th century and reshaped half the world? In a powerful Rome still ruling the Mediterranean, would Islam have spread so far? Or would Rome's dominance have contained it? Perhaps Islam, instead of spreading as a civilization-shaping power, would have remained a regional faith absorbed slowly into the Roman system. Buddhism, Hinduism, and other Eastern traditions might also have entered the Roman world far earlier through trade routes. Without the chaos of the Dark Ages, those roots remain intact, carrying not only spices and silk, but also philosophy and spirituality. Would Rome have embraced them? Would temples to Vishnu or Buddha stand alongside the pantheon, not as invaders, but as honored guests? Religion, in this unbroken Rome, may have remained plural, a mosaic of beliefs woven into the empire's framework. Or perhaps the empire would eventually impose a singular, universal faith, one religion for all, backed by the weight of Roman law. But if so, which faith would it be? The gods of Olympus, Christ, or perhaps a faith entirely unknown to us, born of centuries of cultural blending under the eternal empire? The philosophy of a continuous age. Philosophy is the mirror of human thought. When Rome fell, philosophy's voice grew faint. The ideas of Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, all preserved only in fragments, rediscovered much later. But in an eternal Rome, these voices would never fade. The Stoics, with their call for resilience and duty, might have shaped not only individual ethics, but entire systems of governance. Imagine a world where public servants are trained in Stoic philosophy. Their goal not personal gain, but service to the empire and harmony with nature. The Epicureans, often misunderstood as mere seekers of pleasure, might have offered an alternative, a philosophy of balance, simplicity, and the pursuit of peace. Perhaps their teachings would have shaped society into one less focused on conquest, more focused on well-being. And from this continuous debate, new philosophies would arise earlier. Ideas of democracy, equality, or even human rights concepts we associate with the Enlightenment might have been discussed in the 6th or 7th century instead of the 18th. Imagine revolutions happening centuries before they did in our timeline. Imagine societies questioning slavery, gender roles, or hierarchy long before our modern world ever did. Or perhaps, under Rome's iron grip, philosophy becomes a tool of the state debate, permitted only within boundaries set by the emperor. In that case, wisdom is preserved, but freedom of thought is not. Would continuous philosophy make us freer or more controlled? The arts of an eternal Rome. Now, let us picture the arts. In our timeline, the fall of Rome brought a decline in sculpture, architecture, painting, and theater. Centuries passed before art reawakened during the Renaissance. But in this alternate Rome, there was no pause. Sculptors refined marble into lifelike figures centuries before Michelangelo is ever born. Painters experiment with perspective and light not in the 15th century, but perhaps in the 7th. Mosaics expand from floor and wall to citywide public displays, glowing in colors so vivid they seem almost alive. Theater does not disappear, but evolves, becoming a fusion of drama, music, and eventually technology. Imagine amphitheaters with sound amplification centuries before microphones, or stage effects that blur the line between performance and magic. And architecture, architecture. The Colosseum was once a marvel of its age. In this world, it becomes the first of many, replicated and expanded across the empire. Aqueducts stretch not only across valleys but across oceans, their design evolving into something resembling modern bridges and transportation networks. By the time we arrive in what we call the Middle Ages, Rome's world might already be building skyscrapers of marble and steel, temples of light and glass, vast cities planned on scales we can scarcely imagine. In our timeline, art dies and is reborn. In this one, art never dies. It grows endlessly. Law, morality, and the universal system. Rome gave the world law. Property rights, contracts, trials, so much of what we take for granted has roots in Roman legal thought. But in our history, these systems fractured, reshaped by medieval kings and later revolutions. In an eternal Rome, the legal system never fragments. It continues to expand, refine, and unify. By now, the world might live under a single universal code of law. Every citizen of the empire, whether in Africa, Europe, Asia, or the Americas, judged by the same principles. At first glance, this seems ideal. No corruption of borders, no conflicts of custom, a shared foundation of justice. But law can be a double-edged sword. What if the system is fair but rigid? What if the empire values order above freedom, silencing dissent in the name of stability? Perhaps we would have more justice, or perhaps we would live under a cage of rules, where diversity of thought and culture is quietly pressed into conformity. Reflections and thought experiments. Pause for a moment. Picture yourself in this alternate world. You are a citizen of Rome, not a nation, not a kingdom, but a province of the empire. You speak Latin not as a scholar, but as your daily tongue. The buildings around you are not medieval castles, but Roman forums, updated with centuries of technological innovation. Your faith may be one of many, tolerated so long as loyalty to the empire remains. Your laws are universal, familiar no matter where you travel. Your art, your literature, your philosophy all continuous, stretching back to the first days of Greece and Rome, uninterrupted by collapse. This is a world without the Dark Ages, a world where humanity never paused, a world where Rome never fell. Would you prefer this world bright, ordered, advanced? Or do you sense its shadow, the weight of conformity, the silence of suppressed voices, the price of progress that never bends, never breaks, never renews? The Dark Ages in our history were a time of loss. But loss, too, creates space for renewal. In our timeline, collapse gave rise to reinvention. From ashes came the Renaissance. From ruin came revolution. From silence came new voices, new faiths, new philosophies. In this alternate world, the flame never flickers. Knowledge flows. Religion blends. Philosophy grows. Art never dies. Law becomes universal. And yet, perhaps something is lost as well. The diversity born of struggle, the new paths opened by collapse, the resilience learned only by rebuilding. As we move into the next chapter, we will step away from the great sweep of philosophy and culture. We will instead narrow our focus. We will walk the streets of a modern Roman world. We will imagine what daily life might feel like, what you would see, hear, and touch if you woke up tomorrow as a citizen of the eternal empire. Let us now begin to explore modern Rome, society and daily life. Chapter 4: Modern Rome, Society and Daily Life. We have walked through the possibilities of history. What knowledge might have survived, what philosophies might have flourished, what faiths might have been reshaped beneath the weight of an immortal empire. But history is not only written in marble halls and libraries. It is lived in the quiet rhythm of ordinary days. And so let us step away from emperors and philosophers. Let us step into the sandals of the people themselves. What would life feel like in a modern Roman world? The language of the eternal empire. Imagine waking up in your home, stretching into the morning light. And as you speak to your family, you are not speaking English, nor French, nor Spanish, but Latin. Not the Latin of dusty textbooks, frozen in time, but a living, breathing Latin, refined by centuries of use, evolving just as English has in our world. Instead of salve, you greet your neighbor with a smooth, modern phrase that flows from Latin roots. Legal documents, science textbooks, the chatter of markets, the poetry sung in theaters, all of it carried in the same language. There are no borders of tongues dividing Europe, no patchwork of dialects fracturing nations. Instead, there is one common speech, understood across the globe, layered with local accents, but universally Ramon. This alone would shape daily life, where we struggle in our world to bridge cultures and languages. In the eternal empire, unity of speech creates a constant thread, a shared identity, a belonging that stretches from the British Isles to the deserts of Arabia, from Africa's coast to the steppes of Asia. But would this unity bring harmony or uniformity? Would the poetry of small languages, the richness of local words and stories, survive in quiet corners? Or would they fade, silenced beneath the smooth order of a universal tongue? The architecture of daily life step into the streets. They are not lined with medieval cottages or modern glass towers. Instead, they bear the unmistakable mark of Rome. Wide avenues paved in marble, promenades stretching into shaded walkways. Aqueducts not ancient relics, but living infrastructure, carrying fresh water across entire continents. But these are not the ruins we know from history. These are living cities, expanded by centuries of uninterrupted innovation. The aqueducts, now powered by advanced engineering, resemble soaring bridges with rail lines running atop them. The forums, once places of political debate, now buzz with markets, schools, and technology woven into their stone foundations. Skyscrapers might still exist, but built in Roman style. Towering arches of reinforced marble. Facades adorned with mosaics that shimmer in the sun. Balconies carved into geometric perfection. Even the Colosseum is alive again, not as a ruin for tourists, but as a stadium of entertainment fitted with holographic displays or advanced projection systems. Where gladiators once fought with steel, perhaps athletes now compete with augmented technology, racing, dueling, performing before vast crowds that still roar in unison, as they did 2,000 years ago. The city is not just functional, it is theatrical. Rome, after all, loved spectacle. Every building is a monument. Every street is a stage. Daily life feels like walking through a world that is both ancient and futuristic, familiar and strange. The rhythm of the day begins at dawn. The sun rises, and temples still chime with ceremonial hymns, not to a single god, but to many, as Rome's plural faiths continue their coexistence. Some worship Jupiter, others Christ, others gods from distant lands, all under the empire's protective eye. Shops open in the Forum. Markets bustle with goods from every province, spices from India, silks from China, grain from Africa, furs from northern lands. Trade is not exotic. It is ordinary, daily, constant, just as it was in ancient Rome, but on a planetary scale. Children walk to schools modeled after the old academies. They learn Latin rhetoric, mathematics, natural philosophy, and the sciences of engineering and medicine. Their textbooks are drawn not from fragments of rediscovered knowledge, but from an unbroken chain of discovery. And as the day continues, the empire hums with its own rhythm. Citizens meeting in bathhouses that have now evolved into vast public wellness centers. Senators debating in great halls, though their politics now reach across the globe rather than a single peninsula. Builders, architects, and engineers continuing the eternal Roman project of reshaping the world into ordered beauty. Technology, the Roman way. But what of technology? Would Rome, with its taste for order and spectacle, create the same machines we know today? Perhaps yes and perhaps no. Instead of cars, perhaps we see chariot-like vehicles gliding on magnetic tracks, built upon the Roman love of the wheel and the road. Instead of airplanes as we know them, perhaps aerial craft resemble winged galleys, powered by advanced engines but designed with Roman grandeur in mind. Instead of our plain satellites, perhaps orbiting structures gleam like temples in the sky, bearing the marks of Roman artistry as much as science. Imagine computers not born from our Silicon Valley, but from the mathematical traditions of Rome. Would they look the same? Would they function the same? Or would they feel different, less personal, more centralized, built first for governance and empire before the individual? Rome's genius lay not only in invention, but in administration. So perhaps technology in this world is not scattered across companies and nations. Instead, it is centralized, overseen by imperial bureaus. Progress comes not from competition, but from state-driven innovation. This means faster roads, grander monuments, and breathtaking spectacles. But perhaps slower revolutions, fewer wild leaps of genius, less freedom for the eccentric, the outsider, the rebel. Would Rome's technology bring wonder? Yes. But would it allow the same messy creativity that gave rise to our world? That is less certain. Entertainment and leisure. No vision of daily life in Rome is complete without its entertainment. The Colosseum still stands at the empire's heart, but it has evolved. No longer blood and sand, but games of light, sound, and technology. Imagine sporting events where augmented gladiators clash, not to the death, but in displays of skill and strategy. Imagine dramas projected in lifelike holograms, entire epics unfolding before an audience seated beneath Roman arches. And yet some traditions remain. Music echoes through the streets, flutes, lyres, drums blended now with instruments invented long after Rome's fall in our history. A strange fusion of ancient melody and modern harmony, weaving soundscapes both familiar and alien. Public festivals mark the calendar. Saturnalia is still celebrated, but now on a global scale, lights and processions stretching across continents, a festival of joy binding billions in shared ritual. Leisure, too, is shaped by Rome's old traditions. Bathhouses are not ruins but living institutions, vast wellness complexes with heated pools, saunas, gardens, and now perhaps advanced therapies, blending old ritual with new science. For Rome, leisure was never separate from civic life, and in this world it still is not. Entertainment is not escape. It is belonging, unity, identity, social order, and citizenship. At the heart of Roman life is citizenship. In ancient Rome, citizenship was a prized possession, granting rights and privileges others could not claim. Over time, it was extended to conquered peoples, knitting provinces into a unified whole. In a modern Rome, citizenship is universal. Every person on earth, whether born in what we call Spain, Egypt, India, or the Americas, is a Roman citizen. But with citizenship comes hierarchy. Rome thrived on order. There were patricians and plebeians, senators and equestrians, slaves and freedmen. Would these layers still exist today? Perhaps slavery in its brutal ancient form would fade, but echoes of hierarchy might remain, castes of privilege, ranks of influence, levels of status that determine one's place in the empire. And yet at the same time, the idea of Roman identity would unite billions. One empire, one citizenship, one law. No wars between nations, no divided states, no foreign borders. Unity and control. Dignity and conformity. Would you feel freer in such a world, or more tightly bound to a single, all-encompassing system? A pause for reflection. Now pause for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine walking through this eternal Rome. The streets beneath your feet are marble, polished smooth by centuries of footsteps. Above you, aqueducts soar like bridges of light, carrying water, power, and life. Around you, voices speak Latin not as scholars, but as ordinary people. Your entertainment comes not from Hollywood, but from vast theaters built upon Roman foundations. Your laws are not national, but global, drawn from an unbroken Roman code. Your faith, your philosophy, your very sense of identity, all shaped by an empire that never ended. Is this a utopia, or is it a gilded cage? This is the daily life of a modern Roman world, unified, structured, advanced, spectacular, a civilization that never stumbled, never collapsed, but marched onward across centuries. And yet, as with all things Roman, the question remains, would this endless order bring humanity closer to perfection, or would it bind us too tightly, leaving no room for chaos, for diversity, for the unexpected sparks that often shape history? As we leave behind the streets of modern Rome, we turn now to a final reflection. We have seen the glory of an eternal empire, the wonders it might bring, and the questions it leaves behind. Now, in our last chapter, we will weigh its legacy. We will ask, what are the true costs and true gifts of a Rome that never fell? Let us step forward into the enduring legacy, pros and cons of perpetual power. Chapter 5. The Enduring Legacy, Pros and Cons of Perpetual Power Rome. The Eternal City. The empire that in our history rose, reached for the heavens, and then crumbled into ruin. But in this alternate world we have been exploring, it never fell. We have walked through its politics, its knowledge, its religions, its arts. We have imagined the streets of a modern Roman world alive with marble towers, universal law, and Latin as the global tongue. But now, at the end of our journey, we must step back. We must ask the most important question of all. Would an eternal Rome be a gift to humanity or a burden? The bright legacy, the promise of eternal order. On one side, the dream shines brightly. Rome never falls. Humanity never stumbles. Civilization never collapses into darkness. In this world, there are no dark ages, no centuries of silence where knowledge withers. Instead, wisdom flows forward, unbroken, like a mighty river. Medicine advances early, saving lives that in our timeline were lost. Engineering scales new heights, creating wonders we can barely imagine. Art flourishes, never forgotten, never needing to be reborn. Philosophy continues, unbroken, shaping morality and governance across millennia. There are no world wars, no endless conflicts between nations, for there are no nations, only provinces. Humanity is one people, under one law, united beneath the eagle of the empire. For the ordinary citizen, life is stable, predictable, structured. You are protected by Rome's armies. You are sustained by Rome's aqueducts. You are guided by Rome's laws. You are entertained by Rome's spectacles. Peace, order, progress. This is the shining promise of an immortal empire. The shadow legacy, the price of eternal power. But shadows grow long even beneath the brightest sun. And Rome, for all its wonders, was not only a builder of roads and temples. It was also a machine of conquest, of control, of hierarchy. An eternal Rome might bring peace, but a peace enforced by the sword. It might bring order, but an order that silences dissent. It might bring unity, but unity at the cost of diversity, of independence, of freedom. In our history, the fall of Rome allowed new voices to rise. Germanic tribes, medieval kingdoms, new languages, new nations, all born in the cracks left by the empire's collapse. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the revolutions of modern times, each, in its own way, grew from the struggle to rebuild after ruin. But in a world where Rome never fell, perhaps those voices never emerge. Perhaps rebellion is crushed before it begins. Perhaps creativity is stifled by tradition. Perhaps progress is steady, yes, but also narrow, bound by the empire's desire for control. Would slavery have ended? Would equality have blossomed? Would democracy, human rights, and freedom of speech have been born, or strangled before they could take root? Rome's legacy might not be utopia. It might be a gilded cage, beautiful, ordered, secure, but a cage nonetheless. The balance of light and shadow. As we reflect, we see both sides. The light, 1,000 years of uninterrupted progress. A unified world without endless wars. Art, philosophy, and knowledge thriving without pause. The shadow. Tyranny lasting not decades but millennia. Diversity of culture, language, and thought slowly eroded. Humanity's spirit of rebellion and reinvention bound beneath imperial law. Is steady progress always better than the cycle of rise and fall? Or is there wisdom in collapse? A wisdom that forces humanity to reinvent, to rediscover, to grow in ways no empire could predict? The larger question, what is civilization's true destiny? This is the heart of the thought experiment. Not just Rome, but civilization itself. Do we thrive best under unbroken order? Or do we grow most when we fall, when we rebuild, when we question the very foundations of power? History, after all, is not just a march toward progress. It is also a dance between stability and disruption, between empire and collapse, between order and freedom. Perhaps an eternal Rome would have given us wonders beyond imagining. Perhaps it would have given us tyranny that lasted forever. Perhaps it would have given us both light and shadow side by side. Closing reflection, the eternal question. And so, as we reach the end of this journey, we return to the beginning, to the vision of Rome, alive and unbroken. Its streets filled with people, its arches soaring into the sky, its legions marching not into history, but into eternity. Would this Rome be a utopia? A world of peace, order, and endless progress? Or would it be a gilded cage? A world of control, uniformity, and silent chains? The truth, perhaps, is that we cannot know. But by imagining it, by stepping into the marble halls of this alternate history, we see more clearly our own world. A world shaped not by eternal order, but by collapse and rebirth. A world where Rome did fall, and from its ruins, something new was born. So as you open your eyes, leaving behind the vision of an unfallen empire, carry this question with you. Do we dream of worlds without collapse? Or do we need the fall, the chaos, the struggle, to truly be free? Rome never fell, but perhaps in some way it had to.